Right, welcome everyone to another Gingergm video. Sorry this one's a bit delayed. I've been playing quite a lot of chess recently. I played a tournament in Malta, very nice tournament over there, and I've just finished the London Chess Classic FIDE Open as well. I'm going to try to do a couple of those games in video and other formats soon, so you can follow what I've been up to. This game we're going to look at now is from the last round of Malta, and my opponent was a 25-50 Grandmaster Mirzoev, and it was a game in a Dutch defence. I really need to win this game to try to get some money and to make sure the tournament wasn't a disaster. And I think this is a very good game in the Dutch, actually. I think it sort of shows the potential of the Dutch defence, even against a really strong player. Like I said, my opponent's 25-50 rated Grandmaster, and he didn't really understand how to face this opening. So I think this is a nice, especially the middle game. I think the middle game is it shows some key moments of how you can handle playing the Dutch and some of the things you should be looking at doing. So I managed to win this game, quite happy with it, and the tournament was a lot of fun. I included some photos with this post, and please feel free to leave any comments. I'll move on to the London Classic, maybe have some games from that tournament very soon. But so far the Dutch is holding up very well, the classical Dutch. It doesn't seem to have any serious problems, and I'm very happy with the way it's going. I'm going to continue to use this as much as I can. Okay, so the game started d4, e6, and we quickly got a standard kind of position. My opponent chose the most popular kingside fianchetto line. And now, in this position, white tends to play the move c4 here, but my opponent played another very sensible move, b3. And this makes a lot of sense to double fianchetto, because the bishop's quite well placed on b2, where it stops my e5 advance. Originally I was thinking about playing knight to e4 here, because this does save the option of me playing d5 in one move, if need be, but I didn't actually like the response knight to e5 here. And the point being, if I go d6, his knight drops back to d3, and he just continues with f3 on the next move, pushing my knight away. So instead I played the standard way to enter the classical Dutch, the Dutch I've been playing all my life, and the Dutch I'm most famous for, pawn to d6. My opponent now continued with c4, so he did transpose back into this variation, and now my knight came into e4. And generally this is the way I'm going to recommend playing the classical Dutch. Knight into e4, followed up by moves like bishop to f6, trying to take control of this diagonal, knight to c6, and potentially e5. So this is the kind of thing I'm trying to do here, and this works out very well in a number of my games, especially in this game, as you'll see. So bishop to b2, bishop to f6, and now my opponent played knight to c3. In a previous round, my opponent played knight on b to d2, which I think's slightly more accurate. If I get time, I'll have a look at this again, when that game continued, knight c6, knight takes knight, which I think is actually quite a good move, pawn takes, knight e1, d5, and now knight to c2. And this is nothing seriously to worry about for black, but white might better claim something very small here, but there's a lot of dynamic play. Anyway, in the game, my opponent played knight to c3, I continue knight to c6. My opponent can now transpose by taking on e4, but instead he played e3. And I actually think this e3 move is a serious error. It actually shows that white also has to be very careful in this classical Dutch line. If he plays normal, sensible, simple moves, he can quickly get a bad position. And this e3 move is really far too slow, because it allows me to achieve the e5 break after knight takes knight, bishop takes knight. Now I just went queen to e7. If I go e5 straight away, it gives him the option of taking the queens off. Maybe he throws the check in first. And as I really wanted to win this game, I wanted to try to keep the queens on. But after queen to e7, he can't stop me playing e5 on my next move, which is going to gain a very promising position for me. My opponent continued on the queen side, b4, and now e5. And as I've stated in a number of my books, a number of my videos before, if black can play e5 in the classical Dutch, he's generally doing well. And I was very comfortable with my position here. Even though it looks like white's doing quite well on the queen side after b5, knight to d8, and already I saw this idea that I was able to implement in the game of playing knight to f7 later on, and followed up by g5, g4, knight g5, and knight to f3 at some point. So knight to d8, queen to b3, maybe threatening c5, and now I played the e4 advance. My opponent moved the knight back to d2, but we can already see his bishop on g2 is very bad now. And now this next moment is a key moment actually for when you've got this e5, e4 move in. It's very important to continue in the way I did here. Now, my opponent, if he's able to play the break f3 at some stage, he might even take the initiative over on the king side, and that also liberate his bishop on g2 because he can free up the e4 pawn. So I really want to stop him from playing this f3 break. So my next move, g5, is aimed directly against this. I want to go g4, stopping f3, and then have this idea going knight f7, knight g5, knight to f3 later on. And this works very well. My opponent played bishop to b4. If he played c5 check, I was going to continue with a rather crafty d5. The point being, if he takes this pawn, I go bishop to e6, winning the queen. And after d5, if he plays something like c6, I thought my position was very promising. After queen f7, something like bishop b4, rook e8, takes, rook c1, knight to e6. I'm covering everything on the queen side. I'm ready to continue with f4 with a big attack. So my opponent after g5 played bishop to b4. My next move is now positionally forced, because if he's now defending the e3 pawn, it's worth noting in this position he can't really go f3 here because the e3 pawn will be on pre at some moment. But after bishop to b4 he's threatening to go f3. So I really need to play this g4 move now. And now I've shutting his bishop on g2, and I've always had an initiative on this king side, maybe h4, and maybe this knight maneuver of coming in here as well. So my opponent has to do something on the queen side, c5 check, but my pieces are actually well placed to deal with this. I'm able to go bishop to e6. If he goes d5 at any moment, his rook on a1 is on pre, so he can't really play his d5 move. So he took on d6, opening the c-file, and now queen to a3, pressurising d6. But my knight can now come round, knight to f7, and you can see by my red arrows it has an idea. Rook c1, and now a5. So this forces one of white's pieces away from this diagonal here, this move a5. It's actually a very useful move to play. My opponent took, rook takes, and now queen b2. Bishop to d5 is now played. And this is a very promising position for me because I just have a number of ideas. h4 is one idea, eventually, f4 at some moment, and knight to f3. My queen side is quite solid, it's hard for him to get on. Now, he should have tried bishop to f1 here. Whoops, excuse me. He should have tried bishop to f1. But this does take a piece away from the king side, but he had to try this move. Instead, he played far too slow, not sensing the danger of the position. But we can see that the opening has been a complete success for black here. And I like this idea, when your opponent's gone e3, as you can see here, of trying to play the move e4 and g4. If you can get these two moves in when your opponent's played e3 and g3, his bishop's going to be a bad piece and you have a stable attacking block. So this is one key thing to remember from this game. My opponent played a3. I continued with h5, just trying to loosen up my opponent on the king side. Rook to c2. h4, rook c1, and now I had rook to c6, keeping the c-file closed. And after rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, my opponent is really just positionally lost here. He doesn't really have any possibilities here. And he can't get his piece in the game. I'm slowly going to beat him on the king side. Exactly what happened. My opponent played knight to c4. He wants to go knight b6, get rid of my strong piece on d5, but there's no need for me to rush my attack. Rook to b8 first, stops this idea and threatens c5. My opponent moved his queen out of the pin, and now just a very nice positional move, queen to e6. Now, queen to e6 has a number of ideas. First of all, increase the pressure on the knight on c4, tying down my opponent's pieces. Another idea, maybe after I play f4 later on, my queen might better fly over to h3. But more importantly, my d6 pawn needs to be defended so my knight can move. So I want to go bishop to e7, defending my pawn, which this bishop on f6 is not a very good piece, and then I want to continue with knight to g5 and knight to f3. This is my main point. My opponent tried knight to a5, and now just king to g7. The point behind this is if he takes on c6, I go rook to c8. He can no longer go knight to e7 check because my king has avoided that trick, and I'm going to win a piece. So my opponent could not see anything better than moving the knight back to c4, just showing how hopeless his position is. Now bishop to e7. My plan has been achieved. I want to go knight g5 to f3. My opponent got desperate here. He took on h4. He realised how bad his position was, but the game was over very quickly. He's playing on the side of the board he's weakest. Never a good idea. I just played bishop takes pawn, h3. I took this one, opening up the king side. He now played bishop to h1. He was in trouble anyway. My bishop simply came back now, so my knight can come to g5. Knight to d2. h2 check, just opening up some lines. King takes, queen g6, threatening rook to h8. Bishop to g2. And now, at last, my knight comes into g5. This killer idea that was foreseen very early on in the game. This wins the game, basically. Opponent tried to run away. My rook now comes in. He keeps running, but rook to h2 stops him running any further. a4, and now just a simple knight to e6, and this wins the bishop on g2. So my opponent resigned here. So I was quite happy with that game. It seemed like a very smooth Dutch win against the Grandmaster 2550. Shows you just how good this opening could be. Key points were, earlier on my opponent played this rather slow e3 move, which allowed me to take on c3 and go queen e7, forcing e5 through. And then another key moment later on is like my knight come round to d8. Now you can see how strong this knight was later on. And then the two moves e4 followed up by g4. And as soon as I got these moves in, I got a tie on the king side. I had to watch his counterplay on the queen side, but I could keep this all under control. And eventually you could see that everything went good for me on the king side attack. So quite happy with that game. Shows you another good Dutch win. I've had some very interesting games in Dutch. About the book, the e-book, well, I'll update you that very soon. Still waiting on it, so my apologies for that. But when it does come out, hopefully it'll be very good and it'll be worth the wait. So thank you. Please feel free to leave any comments.